Hello, and welcome back to Kim Reads. We continue on with Phantom. I became altogether reliant on Father Manzart for the sensible management of Erik's soul and intellect. When he suggested sending samples of the child's designs to the School of Fine Arts in Paris, I made no murmur of protest. I knew he had an old acquaintance there, a friend who had once shared his education at the Lycée Henri Quartier and lectured on architecture. If Professor Guizot could be persuaded to take an interest in my son, I was ready to accept whatever device or assistant he might be prepared to give me. Erik was already showing signs of boredom, and when he was bored, he was unbearably badly behaved and inclined to dangerous mischief. He could not be sent to school, and I had little chance of engaging a tutor suitable to his extraordinary needs. Professor Guizot seemed to be my only hope of preserving sanity, and I awaited his visit with a growing degree of desperation. He did not hurry down to Boscherville, and when he finally arrived, I sensed he was extremely skeptical. Like Father Manzart, he was late in middle age, portly, and a little pompous in bearing. In spite of his studied courtesy, it was quite obvious he considered he had been dragged from Paris on a wild goose chase. I believe it was only out of a sense of obligation to an old school friend that he had come at all, and he appeared determined to look upon the occasion as a little holiday. He seemed more interested in discussing the possibility of duck shooting in the neighboring village of Duclair, and it was with a feeling of increasing despair that I finally suggested rather pointedly that he would like to talk to Erik. "Ah, yes," he observed with sudden, quite unmistakable coolness entering his voice. "The child prodigy. By all means, show him in, madame. I'm sure I shall not need to detain him over long." He measured me with a look of unveiled suspicion, and I felt myself hotly beneath his glance. When Erik came into the room, I saw the professor's guarded surprise at the sight of the mask, but he made no comment. He shook hands with the boy and waited patiently for him to climb onto a chair at the dining room table before placing a sheet of paper in front of him and asking him to name what he saw. "It's an arch," said Erik politely, "a basket arch." "That is correct," I heard mild astonishment in the professor's voice. "Perhaps you would like to show me the keystone." Erik pointed. "The abutment and the impost?" Erik pointed again, and I saw the professor frown. "Center of span, hotch, crown," he barked in quick succession. "Voices extra dos." Erik's finger moved unerringly across the sheet, and I heard him give a faint sign of boredom at this dull and apparently pointless exercise. The professor took out a handkerchief and passed it across his mottled forehead. He suddenly looked uncomfortably warm. "What is the spring line?" he demanded with abrupt aggression. "The level which the arch springs from, which supports," Erik replied calmly. The professor sat down unexpectedly and stared at the child. "Draw me 10 different arches and name them," he ordered. Erik glanced at me impatiently. I knew he was insulted by the simplicity of the task, but when I glared at him, he picked up his lead and began to draw with swift obedience. I withdrew from the room at that point and left them altogether. 3 hours later, when the professor joined me in the drawing room, he was in his shirt sleeves. He looked disheveled and exhausted, not at all the worldly, rather supercilious gentleman who had entered the house with such aplomb shortly afternoon. "Madame," he said solemnly, "I must thank you for permitting me the most remarkable experience of my entire academic career." I had the grace to remain silent, for I sensed that he had something difficult to say, and he was not a man to whom gracious apology came easily. "I have to confess that I came here today fully expecting to expose a clever hoax," he admitted uncomfortably. "When I first received those designs in Paris, my first thought was that my old friend had become the victim of a confidence trick. I am afraid I suspected you, madame, of taking advantage of a kindly, over-credulous nature for your own spurious purposes." I stared at him without comment, and he sprayed his thick hands in a gesture of defeated wonder. What can I say to you, madame? You must already be well aware that your son's advance is a little short of preternatural. I clasped my hands together in relief. Then you admit his genius. He shook his head slowly. Genius is a human attribute. What I have seen today cannot be defined by any word that is known to me. His aptitude is quite beyond belief, madame. I should find it extraordinarily difficult to resist shaping such boundless talent. I closed my eyes briefly, as feeling as though a great weight had been taken from my shoulders. The professor fell silent for a moment, fingering the jacket that lay over one arm, and suddenly all my uneasiness returned. I understand from Father Mansart's letter that there is a serious physical deformity that prevents his attendance at any of our usual seats of educational excellence. That is correct, I said faintly, aware that my heart had begun to sink. Forgive me, madame, but would be proper to inquire... The mask, I bit my lip. You wish to know the reason for the mask. I must admit I find it somewhat eccentric, even disturbing. In this age of enlightenment, one hardly expects to find a child imprisoned in such a fashion. Surely no accident of birth, however severe, can warrant so primitive a measure. My head jerked up at the ignorant criticism. You wish to see? I demanded coldly. You are prepared to show no disgust, no fear that would distress him? He smiled faintly. I think you will find I am a man of the world, he asserted with contemptuous confidence, and you will not allow what you see to interfere with your previous judgment. Now he was plainly insulted. Madame, we are not living in the 16th century. This is an age of empirical and irrational judgment. So you think, I said. With a shrug, I went to the door, called Erik to the room, and removed the mask. I have to admit that Professor Guizot was so good at his word. He lost his high pork-coloring blood as the blood fled from his pendulous cheeks, leaving them gray and flaccid. But not by a flicker of his eye or twitch of his white lips did he betray what he must have felt when he looked at the child's dead face. When we were alone once more, I indicated the chair by the fire. You may sit if you wish, monsieur. Thank you. He sat down by the hearth, arranging his jacket across his knees with a furtive gesture of shaken nerves. I wonder if I might trouble you for a glass of water. I brought him brandy instead, and he accepted it without question, gulping at the rich brown liquid with relief before setting it down on the little circular table beside him with a trembling hand. I think you will allow the necessity of the mask, I said. Yes, he replied in a tone deep of feeling. I very much fear that I do. And, I prompted inexorably. He glanced at the empty brandy glass with regret, but I did not offer him any more. A terrible fear and anger was starting to build inside me. I had intended, if you were agreeable, to take the boy into my own household, where I might instruct him at my leisure and make arrangements for him to take a baccalaureate, but now I see such an arrangement would not be possible. My wife, you understand, is of a nervous disposition, and we have inquisitive neighbors. No, I fear it quite unthinkable. I have my position in society to consider. I clenched my fist. You will not teach him. Madame, he protested helplessly. I knew you would refuse one who had seen. Madame, I beseech you to be reasonable. This child is a monstrous freak. I did not say that, he retorted with dignity, and I must beseech you not to put words into my mouth. I have every intention of teaching him, I assure you, but it cannot be done in Paris where I am so much in the public eye. How then? He got up from his chair and laid one hand on my arm in a fatherly fashion. I do not consider he will require the constant supervision demanded by most students. It will be a question of providing guidelines and stimulations. The case is a challenge, madame, attested my profession ingenuously. You may rest assured that I shall establish a means of study entirely appropriate to the rather singular circumstances in which we find ourselves. I felt tears of gratitude felt welling up into my eyes and turned away hastily before they could fall. "You are very kind," I murmured. "My dear lady," he said, "I am not kind. I am fascinated." It was as well as I had been left in the comfortable circumstances at Charles' death, for otherwise the cost of Eric's uni education would have pauperized us. I was obliged to lease my father's house in Rouen in order to provide him with the tools of his study, but I had not begrudged him the only happiness I was capable of giving. Father Mansart lighted every room in the house with bookshelves, and month after month the obscure and weighty tomes, some of them rare editions, continued to arrive from Paris. Accompanied by instructions and lectures from the professor, he came himself at regular intervals to spend the entire day closeted with his eager pupil. One day, he told me with barely concealed excitement, "This boy will astonish the world." When he spoke of the Grand Prix de Rome and of his determination that Erik should be the youngest ever enter for that coveted prize, I made no comment. Nor did I correct the child when he spoke of the 5 years he expected to study architecture at the Villa Medici as a pensionnaire of the French Academy. Neither I nor the professor was prepared to admit ourselves that castles in the air were the only thing Erik would ever begin the opportunity to build. Like two ostriches, we buried our heads in the sand and refused to look at the ugliness of reality. I dared not think of the life which lay ahead of Erik beyond the protection of my door, a world whose sole purpose would be to mask his grotesque appearance. I dare not begin to anticipate the future, but I could not deny him his dreams. Even then, I was aware that dreams were all he could ever have. And that's it for now. See you later.